All right, everyone, here is our exercise for April. All right, today we're going to talk about form and light and how light falls on form to give us an illusion of three-dimensional space. So this was a demo I did in a class I was teaching at a local college a few years back. This was the first exercise that I made all the students do, and I felt like it was the most important thing for them to do at the beginning of the class to try to help them understand these simple principles of light on form. This is the little sphere that we used. This was it's just a styrofoam ball, and so I handed those out to all the students, set lights up for everybody, and let them do this exact. We did this exact thing after I demoed it. So what we have here are just 5 values, and the number 1 represents the brightest highlight that this sphere could make. Number 2 represents just the light side in its most simplified terms. And number 4, now you'd think that would be 3, but we go to 3 actually. Well, let's keep these in order of value from lightest to darkest. So we go to 3, which is the reflected light. We jump back to 4, and in this case, this is there's probably a lot of different names for this. You could call this the shadow edge. I say that quite often, shadow edge. There's also a term for this called the terminator line, and I believe a lot of old-time illustrators and artists would call it the bedbug line. Where that came from, I don't know, but I kind of like the terminator line. And the terminator line is just simply a separator between the light side and the dark side. And then, before I forget to, then 5 is typically the cast shadow. And one more thing I want to point out here is that the shadow, number 5, the darkest, obviously isn't that dark out here, but I'm referring to maybe this area right through here where it's the darkest. The cool thing about a cast shadow, I think we all know it's probably, and as you can see here, it's going to be the darkest underneath the object that's casting the shadow, and as it works its way away from that object, it gets lighter. More ambient light from the room is entering into that shadow and diminishing it. And the one thing, because this was a demo and I was in a really big hurry, I didn't talk about edges. I think that's what we were. I'm not sure what those were. I'm not sure what we were talking about there. But the other thing I would like to mention, and I guess if I were going to do this again and take a little bit more time doing it, a cast shadow's edge is going to be the sharpest near the object that is casting it. As it gets further away from that object, it gets softer and softer. So that's just a little something to always watch for. So what I thought we would do on today's exercise is take a face and see if we can kind of get these 5 values in a face. I think this makes a lot of sense, but I think the part that's so hard about this is how you translate this information into something other than a sphere. Okay, here we go. I've got our paper all set up. This is a piece of Hahnemuhle. I'm so sorry. I know it's a German paper I draw on a lot. I don't know how to pronounce it. Actually, I've had a few people tell me how to pronounce it, and I still can't quite pronounce it right. So I'll put a link in this post to the paper and actually where I get it. But I thought maybe working with charcoal and chalk would better illustrate our principles we're talking about here. So we're going to just do a really quick sketch here. This isn't going to be very pretty. That's a good disclaimer. And also what I've got here too, this is a little piece of vine charcoal. And here, let's see. I'll work with, if you guys ever seen me maybe on some of my posts or something, I use this little bamboo holder that I made. This is a handmade holder, and it has a piece of vine charcoal in it. Actually, maybe that's the piece of vine charcoal I'll use. And I just use that. It's kind of like the idea of a brush, just to be able to get back a little further, and also to keep me from busting my my vine charcoals. I always end up breaking them. So, but today this is a really small drawing, and I just don't think we're going to need it. And we just want to kind of get in here really close, see if we can capture some of these basic forms. This overall shape, she's got a lot of It's a lot of hair. These are, let's see, this, she has bangs that come down here. I guess maybe even finding the eyes might not be a bad idea. All right, so that kind of represents her face. This is a very dark and moody, very dark, moody portrait. Love that shadow right there. Oh, and I always start with, if I'm working with charcoal, I like to start with Vine charcoal too. Vine charcoal is so forgiving. It's got to be the most forgiving medium there is, bar none. It just comes off so easily. Let's go down here and just establish the shadows for the hair. I have to decide what I'm going to do down there. There's a, I got to lose her chin. Like the physical, if you were to reach up there and touch her chin, you'd hit that spot right there. But there's a cast shadow down there. So, that when you're working on proportions, that's the thing you don't want to lose, is that spot right there. And her part, you can see her part comes down. I don't know if this is going to end up looking like her. It's not, it's an exercise, so I'm certainly not going after likeness. Just a rudimentary shapes is all. Okay, so, I'm also going to switch now to, I think I'll switch to a pencil. So when I feel like I've gotten things in pretty close, and I will come back with Vine charcoal. I never really completely abandon it. It just does something different than your charcoal pencils do. Eyes are in there somewhere. Just, you establish that eye socket. The mystery continues. Okay, this is a little pencil. This is called a Ritmo, and you don't need to run out and buy those. They're very similar to these general pencils. I just ended up putting tape on these because I got tired of having to read how hard or soft they were. This is the softest, the 6B, and I just put four little rings of tape on it. This is an HB, so I have one, and for some reason everything else in between those two has disappeared. It must be in my travel kit. So, but I think I'll start with this Ritmo, which is a B. Their designations are just a little bit different. They don't have as many numbers as the generals have. They just have 3. I always like portraits, or I always like charcoal at this stage. I like this this really ethereal look. Looking for cast shadows. There's a cast shadow right there from her hair. Sharp edges. All right, let's come in here. Now this is, if I can find it, so this is just a little piece of NuPastel. And I do use, these are the general, well, yeah, it's all worn off in there. That's a general white charcoal. It's not really charcoal, it's chalk, but I like these little, I kind of like this because it's, I actually get, these are not the white, these are the next ones, they're called ivory. And for some reason, I kind of like those on this paper. They're a little harder to manipulate because they don't come in a pencil form, but I don't think that's really much of a big deal. You still have to sharpen them. Pull that nose up just a little higher. So now I'm just going to kind of go through and establish the light side a little bit more. And this is a little bit of a halftone in there. I'm just going to leave that alone. Establish that upper lip. That's another little kind of a triangle. Catches a lot of light right there. This one catches a lot of light. Okay, so now we can start talking about that principle a little bit. Let's see, I'll go back to Vine Charcoal here. So I think, yeah, it looks like I've got room here. So let's see if I can draw, let's see if I can draw a circle. Okay, well, I've drawn worse, I've drawn better. That's not too bad. Whew. Okay, so there's our sphere. And so we have a light source on her. It's looking like, yeah, it's pretty much coming in. Maybe it's a little lower than I usually do. Maybe a little higher. Something like that. So just the same thing on that exercise I showed you guys. There's the highlight. And on then the terminator line. A simplified form. And you know, when you're working with those forms like that on a round surface, I try to always imagine if you could see through that thing. So it's an ellipse that wraps around. In particular, if you were to put a rubber band around that ball, you can see what I'm like that, and then there's your see if I can get that. Yeah, there's that line right there. So when I'm drawing an ellipse, that's kind of how I try to see it in my head. I know that it goes around. I know that it goes around that form. So here's our light side, and then our shadow side, and our cast shadow. And there's a little reflected light in there, but be careful on that reflected light. Don't let that come out too far. If the reflected light, I'd say that would be my warning. You know, I think it's really exciting. I think reflected light is fun. And when you've gotten to the point in your work where you feel like you can begin to put reflected lights in, and they're working, you get so excited, and I think you overplay your hand just a little bit, and you make them a little too light. And so if this reflected light in here becomes too close to this light or even that level, that value, it ruins the three-dimensionality. So you do have to keep the value down. Okay, so that is what we have here. So let's look at this. Let's see if we can find some things in here. So let's find, because a face is much more complicated than that sphere, right? But let's say, and I'm looking at her, this right here, and it's quite often this, is the brightest bright. I'm convinced I got it in the right spot. And we can keep that as simple as we want. There are really lots of nuances in here. You know, as that wraps down in her cheek just a little bit, there's a little half tone in there. So, you know, as you really come back in to start refining this portrait. That seems very gritty. I think that has a little piece of grit. There we go. That's a much better side. A little halftone right there. There's a little halftone right there. But this principle is keeping this simple. So now we can kind of establish the terminator line. So I'm going to exaggerate. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to exaggerate this for you guys. Comes up around that nose. Now it splits here, and it comes down on the back side of that nose, but it really goes this direction. Sometimes you have to make that decision. Comes back up, then it catches that right there. And again, it's wrapping around a very soft form with lots of little nuances in it. So if I'm looking at the photograph, it's not a hard line. It meanders back and forth just a little bit. That's perfectly fine to do that. But again, let's keep things simple. And on a really, I kind of over exaggerate that terminator line when I'm doing a demo so people can really see it. But quite often on a soft form, there's a very soft transition there. That's why quite typically, I broke that down into its simplest forms. There was the light side and shadow side, but there is kind of a half tone that develops right in front of the terminator line. So quite often you'll get a little half tone in front of it and then the darkness behind it, but there's still that one area that's going to be that dark, right where it turns into that darkest area. So, that's the same thing here on the cheek. It's kind of hard to say, well, my light really helped us illustrate that here because it's just a single light source. If you're using a soft box, it's going to be a little more difficult to find that terminator because the soft box it does just that. It creates a very soft, atmospheric look in your light. So this is the easiest type of light to find that terminator. And then it joins back up right here, actually. Comes back up to that nose. Joins in that. You could even go across the bottom of the nose there. Right there. Gets a little more complicated as it goes up around that back side of the nose with the little wing of her nose right there is coming out in light. So it does get a little more complicated than that, but you can kind of see what we're doing though, is how this is all, how we're simplifying all this. And you could even follow it. Let's see, that goes right into her lip. There's some reflected light in there, but you just lose all that. Her lips are slightly parted right in there, so give her just a little mystery to that. And then that edge of that mouth drops off into real soft, and this all just disappears into that shadow. Anyway, it kind of picks back up right there. So I'm keeping this line a little stronger just for illustrative purposes, but if I were just doing this drawing, there would be a lot of variations in that terminator line. I wouldn't keep it that distinct. So this area right here, that's a little hard right there. That's an area I'm definitely going to want to soften. But again, you can kind of see that terminator maybe comes all the way out there, comes back, drops. Let's see. So now I'm going to change that shape just a little bit. Pull that out a little further. See, right there it gets really muddled because it's very soft. It joins down there, and that's that one little area we don't want to lose. Okay, so there's our terminator line. Then you can kind of decide what to do with all this stuff, but by doing that, you're going to establish the light side and the shadow side. Now let's just do this too. So her jaw, she has a little wider jaw. See if I can get it symmetrical. That's the trick for me, is getting it symmetrical. So then once you establish that terminator line, what I want you guys to do is just find it. Look for it. Look for it in your work. And see, then I can come back and destroy it. I know it's there. I know that's established the form. And then, oh, the last thing too, before I forget too, that's that reflected light in there. So remember, that's our number 3 value, right? And that's the thing that I'd like to warn you guys, just try not to overdo that. Try to keep that really, like I said, don't let it come up into those values. And drawing's a good thing, because in painting you have temperature you can work with. And so, you can put in the red down there. And I think when you do that, you're seeing it's a good thing. You're seeing the red, or maybe whatever colors are reflecting up into there. Typically it's a warm color. And you get so excited about that, you forget about what value. And red is the hardest color to tell its inherent value. So that's an exercise I think we'll do upcoming. That was a great one I did for my students. And that is working with the inherent value of all the colors. There's actually quite a few exercises we can do about that, and that's very important. So yeah, red will throw you off quicker than any other color. I got that in the wrong spot. I kind of hammered that in there. This is pretty forgiving paper. I can probably move it over pretty easily. All right, let's try that one more time. I think it just needs to go over just a tiny bit, maybe right there. There we go. I was talking about the red color can throw you off for its inherent value. And so that's the advantage of doing exercises in charcoal or pencil, or even if you want to do it in paint, just do it in 2 colors. Like black and white. Do it in black and white, and then you're not being tricked by color, and you're just working the value. So there's a lot of work to be done in those eyes. But anyway, there's reflected light, because we talk about reflected light here, but there's your reflected light right there. So it's in a completely different spot. And you're still thinking of those same principles. So you're going to shoot for that same value, generally speaking, in there. Well, okay, I think that's going to be it for this little exercise. So you guys give that a try, and then put that information in the next thing you're working with. Still life would be great if you have, if this is just too boring, pull out some objects for a still life, and use that principle in those. All right, you guys, I think that's going to do it for this exercise for April. So let's practice that a little bit. And then I'll put out another little exercise for you guys to try in the month of May. All right. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Thank you for watching. Well, in usual fashion for me, I know I told everybody that we were done, and it was just an exercise, but I just went ahead and indulged myself and kept working on it a little bit. and came up with a nice little portrait here I'm quite happy with. And I really just wanted to talk about what I did from where we left off. And you know, if you remember these edges, this Terminator line that we kind of put around all that, you remember how it was kind of all the same. And really all I did is with that mostly I just worked the edges and softened it here and there, and kind of still have to decide what I want to do with that edge. Let's definitely get it a little softer as it goes away from the nose. We talked about that on the in the beginning. Goes into that lip. It's so soft right there. That all just falls into a little softness. That still may be a little hard, and I just keep going back and forth with the white. And I just had to put, I have another little piece of that chalk I put in a holder so I could make smaller marks. And these marks are so subtle. So it really just depends on how far you want to take something. And just draw things. I've tried to keep this entire side soft, so there's no detail in that eye. And I wanted the darks over here. Keep pushing those darks a little bit more and more and more. And that I thought that eye turned out really quite nice. For some strange reason, there is a little catch light in that eye in the photo, so it was funny when I put that in, it really came to life. Anyway, we'll just remember that sphere we talked about, and when you're doing, you know, and this works with a figure too. When you're doing your project, try to always remember that. Try to come back to that kind of light logic is what it is. Whoops. Oh, that's bad. Got a little too close. All right, well, that is it for this, you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.